Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. We're talking again episode 6 of the Book of Boba Fett, and instead of focusing on an aspect of the lore this time, I want to talk about Luke Skywalker, probably the most famous character in Star Wars history, maybe besides for his father, and one who was brought back to life through unconventional means. Now today we will be discussing some very controversial opinions, at least I think a lot of you will find them controversial, and I just want to remind everyone, especially after what I've personally experienced on a couple of occasions, do not harass anybody that I talk about in this video. I'm going out of my way to not include any usernames, don't go search them up, do not send any hate. This is an opinion about Star Wars ultimately in filmmaking. It's not worth being an asshole over. Alright, so Luke Skywalker has been brought back to first the Mandalorian and now the Book of Boba Fett through some pretty impressive technology. Obviously, Mark Hamill is not as he was in 1983, so through a mixture of CGI and deep faking, Mark Hamill's face on 2 occasions now has been reconstructed and put onto another actor. This is not the first time Disney has done this, of course, but in the Book of Boba Fett, this is now the most any one character has been used, and there are unquestionably major advancements that have taken place. Even between the Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, Luke's portrayal is more lifelike, just genuinely a little bit confusing, and reaction to it has definitely been mixed. Personally, upon watching the episode, I was definitely a fan of Luke. I don't like how they did his voice. I think his appearance is great, but essentially his voice is AI generated, which is not only a little bit creepy, but I also don't think it offers the same emotion as normal Luke, and I think you could do better with either Mark Hamill himself or an impersonator. But I think the bigger issue generally is just the reluctance on Disney's part to recast a new actor, and this is where people are really coming down hard on either side of the line. There are a lot of people who believe that Disney should continue with what they're doing, keep recreating these actors who are too old for the role, while others believe that it's a much better option to just hire a new actor, recast Luke Skywalker. And yeah, that's the crux of the situation. The difficulty with Luke Skywalker, even compared to Han Solo, is that we know what both the young and old versions of the character look like. It's not like Bruce Willis in Looper, where you can essentially give Joseph Gordon-Levitt some eyebrows and it looks convincing, or even with the characters casted in the prequels. But the practicality for a lot of people who are against the CGI recreations is not really a concern when dealing with the overall issue of, I think, morality, artistic integrity, and more. So here are a couple of tweets I wanted to read, which I think well sum up the view from that perspective. This one says, terrifying CGI robot Luke feels like the anti-Last Jedi, a perfectly preserved version of how adults remember their childhood hero. None of the charm of a performance, none of the character and how he speaks and moves, the artificiality of an unexamined memory. This other tweet from a separate individual says, just recast Luke already. How many millions of dollars will Disney spend pursuing their ghoulish VFX quest rather than admit that people age and eventually die? Remember when Disney spent millions repurposing of outtakes to cobble together a contextless performance rather than have any normal response to an actor dying, and then killed the character anyway? Then some, I think, get less reasonable and more angry. This one says, I'm so sorry, I had no idea your hero was an inflectionless AI with none of the warmth and charm that Mark Hamill brings to the character. Apparently all you dudes need is a face and voice, and some of you have Insta-Luke. I honestly feel bad if you think this is the same. And the last one I'll read, the CG is amazing. It's a photorealistic rendering of what it would be like to see a young Mark Hamill give a horrible robotic performance without any of the pesky human charm or gravitas. Basically a techno punishment for loving his great work in The Last Jedi. And these are just some of the takes that made their way onto my Twitter feed this morning. You can read thousands more because right now Mark Hamill is trending on Twitter. The discussion is so fervent, but I don't want to mischaracterize it as being totally anti-Luke. In fact, I think among general fans, there's probably more support for what Disney did with the Book of Boba Fett than anti. But there are still some real concerns which I do think are worth mentioning. I personally, and I want to stay relatively objective through most of this, do think that the use of AI to replicate Luke's voice is a mistake. Whether you get an impersonator, whether you get someone to do a fresh take of the character, or whether you get Mark Hamill himself, even if you do some computer touch-ups, I think there's a lot more room for human emotion and, as some posters mentioned, warmth. But I really can't decide where I come down on the physical representation of the character. When I watched Solo, I did have a tough time feeling like Alden was the same character as Han Solo, and I kind of wonder whether a new actor would detract from the experience. But of course, it is still weird that machines are essentially taking away roles from people, and that more and more of filmmaking is becoming artificial. Some people on a base level have issues with that. I'm not sure if I do. I will say though, I think a lot of people's takes on this are representative of the greater issues in fandom discussions as a whole. Not even just fandom, actually, online discussions as a whole. People are getting vitriolic about this, and what's more, making personal insults against people who enjoyed the experience. Like, I don't think it's true that people only like Luke Skywalker to look like he did in Return of the Jedi because it harkens back to their childhood and they're unable to grow up and they hate The Last Jedi. That's ridiculous. That's pandering to a certain crowd. The same way that saying this is so good because it's everything that's not The Last Jedi is. I personally love the idea of a flawed and failing hero because I think it's relatable. I like the scene of Luke and Yoda in the sequel trilogy. It's probably my favorite, but I still think it's really cool to see Luke as he appeared shortly after Return of the Jedi because he's still in that time of his life. And maybe that would work with Sebastian Stan or another character stand-in, but maybe it wouldn't. And I think if anything, it's arrogant to say that the film becomes more poignant in reference to The Last Jedi because people are excited about seeing Luke in a way that none of us expected. I just wish that we could talk about these things reasonably, especially with this emerging technology, without having to exaggerate every aspect of the argument for likes. Okay, maybe you do think the technology is ghoulish, or awful, or whatever other words you choose to use, but I don't think we're at the point where we can say that that's objectively true, especially in this case where Mark Hamill seems to be on board with the recreation. These ethical issues certainly will become more difficult in the future, and I'm also not saying that Mark Hamill saying this is okay means that you have to feel a certain way about it, but there's also just so much arrogance over this issue, which is largely because this is a conversation happening online. I find it very hard to believe that the people who speak like this would do so in a face-to-face conversation, but there's also a sort of elitism, which is often tied to liking The Last Jedi and liking Luke's character, which for one aren't necessarily related, and for two are a bizarre connection to make when the thing we're talking about is how a character should be recreated when the actor's too old. I've talked about this before in Star Wars, but it'd be nice if we could just talk about an issue without having to wrap it around every other microcosm and every other conflict in the Star Wars fandom. It's exhausting, and to be honest, I think it makes a lot of the people having these discussions look really silly. I do want to talk about the technology though, because whether it's evil or good, depending on how you see it, it is innovative. I do wonder whether some of these discussions were happening back in the early 2000s when Attack of the Clones was being made. I wonder what George Lucas would think about this. Arguably, The Mandalorian and now The Book of Boba Fett are the most technically innovative things on television, and they're definitely changing the industry for better or worse. I'm also tired of reading articles about Star Wars having a Luke Skywalker problem. Star Wars is essentially a fairy tale. If you don't see that by now, I don't know what to tell you. This isn't The Godfather. This isn't the Game of Thrones. This is a story that has mythic heroes who are deciding the fate of the galaxy. Now, I'm not saying that Luke Skywalker has to be in every show, and in fact, I would like to see some that he's not in, but these conversations are just exhausting, and that's my fault for browsing Twitter. It's a cesspool. These conversations aren't real. These aren't things that real people talk about in real life, but still, I thought this might be worth putting out there. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments. Until next time, though, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.